we are there to walk alongside people, to hold their hope for them if they can no longer hold it for themselves, just to kind of be that companion during the tough times, a non-judgmental space to listen and to really hear that person where they're at.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora, welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations with me, your host, Andy Dixon. Today I am pleased to share my kōrero with Bridie Boyd, who, among other things, is a chaplain at Hillmorton Hospital, a psychiatric care facility here in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. Bridie is also involved in advocating for and supporting women in the Anglican environment here in Aotearoa, so we talk about that too. I talk to her about her role as chaplain, what it actually involves, the challenges and rewards of doing such a role with people who are struggling in their mental health. And Bridie also shares about her own mental health journey, how that's actually helped her in her role, and what she has learnt along the way. If you find this episode valuable, please consider telling someone about it or sharing it on your socials. Link me into that too so I can see where this is getting out to. I'm at downtoearth.conversations on both Instagram and Facebook. And I hugely appreciate the way that you all help keep this podcast growing by sharing it in your networks. It means a lot, so thank you for that. This is episode 91 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Bridie Boyd. Kia ora, Bridie Boyd. Welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, it's great to be here.
And no hea koe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born and raised in Christchurch, but then when I was about 10, we moved over to the Middle East and I experienced life over there for about 5 years before I left my parental home and went and lived in the UK for 2 years, finished my schooling. During that time, did a lot of travel, really enjoyed myself, and then wound my way back home slowly via Dunedin, where I did some study and landed back here, put down some good roots, got married, had a baby, and now I am working at Hillmorton Hospital as a mental health chaplain.
Awesome. What was it that took the family over to the Middle East?
Parents' jobs. Yeah.
So just being the kid that gets dragged over and...
Pretty much. We did get a vote. It was like a family council meeting. But I think my brother and I were like, sure, why not? We didn't really know what it was we were saying yes to, just that it was moving to somewhere we'd never heard of before.
That's pretty cool though that, what did you say, 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, that your parents would include you in that discussion at that age, because a lot of parents would just be like, right, this is what we're doing, everybody.
No, my parents were never like that. They were always very much have a conversation with us. If you want to do something, it's not a no, but you need to convince us. So I got my first tattoo at 16 with parental blessing.
Wow.
Because I was like, this is what I want, this is why it's meaningful. And they were like, yeah, that makes sense. But you had to do the convincing. You couldn't it wasn't like free pass.
I got my first one when I was 30, so I tell my kids, when you're 30, you're allowed to as well.
Fair enough.
But no, I don't have rules like that really, just to wind them up. So we'll get into your role at Hillmorton soon.
Great.
But you know that's a role that involves working with people who are often marginalised by society. Yeah, hugely. And that seems to be a bit of a trend for you, that you're kind of passionate about people that maybe don't have power in the system. Is that something you've always been passionate about, or have you kind of fallen into that, or?
Bit of a mix. I think it was probably always there, and then it was actually living in the Middle East, and we were there during the time of the Arab Spring, and so my family saw kind of like what it meant for people to be oppressed or not be able to speak out or just have an opinion, and that kind of really sparked off in me kind of going, well, this is really unfair, and I think there's that idea that what do Kiwis value? We really value fairness. So I think for me, it then became like a lifelong quest to try and make it fairer for people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's so many of us in the West that don't know what it's like to be oppressed.
Yeah.
That it's having that up close personal experience of it, being able to see it in real time.
Yeah.
that's a profound experience.
At the time, it was quite freaky, but now I look back on it and it's been such a gift for not only being able to like see my own blessings and what's like really cool about living here, but also going, okay, having gone through that, I can go through other things and other people can too. It can be a source of hope. If you're having a really bad day or a really bad season, you can go, well, other people have gone through this, so we can too.
I think that's how we survived our first 2 months of parenting.
Yeah.
Going, I don't know how we're doing this, but other people get through it, so we must be able to. And then I found out later on that actually we had it a lot harder than a lot of people because Sophia just had real trouble with feeding. And, the baby usually gets back to birth weight within kind of a week.
Yeah.
And it took her 2 months, and she'd grown 5 centimetres in that time. So she was just gaunt and hungry and crying, and then we managed to sort it out, and she became a happy little sleeping child. So,
yeah.
2 months of pretty much no sleep, but naively going, oh yeah, but other people get through it. So
yeah,
but we did.
I was similar in that I didn't realise I developed an infection post-labour. So I was
wow.
Everyone feels really terrible. This is fine. This is normal. And then it was like 3 weeks later, I was like, maybe not this bad though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much you don't know when you're going into parenting.
And no one tells you stuff. They're always just like, oh, you'll learn on the job. And you're like, cool, but could you maybe give some like a roadmap?
You either get told not enough or like way too many opinions.
Yeah.
All about the same thing that are contrary. You know.
I feel like the drip feed of just before you get up to a point, if you could get the information about what's coming next. Cause I was convinced I was going to die because my midwife was like, I was like, when will I get to sleep again? And she was like, oh, don't worry, it'll be really soon, around like 3 or 4 months from now. And I was like, that's so far away.
Yeah.
There's no way I'll make it to that point. But you do, and
you
do fine, and you even manage to look after another human the whole time. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. I often say that to parents that, if you get to the end of the day and your kid's still alive, then you're winning.
Yeah.
And if there's more positive experience than that, then fantastic. But
absolutely. That's the mantra of Tip and I. If he comes home and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I have not cooked dinner. I have done like nothing for the house. He's like, well, is Makari still alive? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, good job, go you.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. One thing that you've been involved in the past, I don't know whether you're still involved in, but is advocating in the kind of women's space in the Anglican Church. Anglicans ordain women as priests. They have women in lots of other roles. That's obviously different than other churches that outright don't do that.
Yeah.
But how do you see, in your experience, how do you see patriarchy still kind of playing a role in the way that we do church life in that space?
I think it's that difference between having like de jure equality and having de facto equality. So it might be like technically fine for women to be leaders in the Anglican space. But when you sit down with a lot of these women and you talk about how did they get there, what hurdles did they face, are they even allowed opinions when they're in meetings, that type of stuff, you're going, oh my goodness, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I think we also make a lot of assumptions that the way it is for us and our experience is the same all through the Anglican communion, but even in our own context, having the 3 tikanga, the way a Pacifica woman will have to deal with kind of oppression and fighting to have her voice heard will be really different to how a Pakeha woman will have to fight to have her voice heard.
Have you seen encouraging changes at all, or is it just hard slog?
Oh, it's like an almost.
Yeah.
There's like an almost, and that's really exciting, I think. I was really thrilled when we started to put in better boundaries and a better complaints process. Yeah. Hopefully you don't have to use it, but it's really nice knowing that if it is there, what's in place. It would be great to kind of see that in more ways, so maybe in some more languages and some more options other than kind of written work. But yeah, I think it's like you get the sense that we're getting like closer and closer with each day. So we're not quite there yet, but it is kind of like almost.
Yeah. You've been involved in this, I guess, because you're passionate about it, but you've actually had roles where this has been a focus. Yes.
So I'm an Anglican Women's Studies counsellor. We have 6 counsellors, 2 from each tikanga. So I am a tikanga Pakeha counsellor. But the work that we do as council isn't split by tikanga, so what we kind of empower
and
or help.
To be clear, that's like sitting on a council, not counselling people.
Yes, yeah. Confusing.
Yeah, same sounding word, but so you're part of a council.
Part of a council, yeah.
And what does that actually involve?
So we get together usually once a month to have meetings, and then we help in a variety of ways. So for some women that's mentoring, which could be funding, could be sit-down coffees, could be just introducing them to other people, kind of that networking space. It could be advocacy work. So if we hear of a particular problem and we're invited by, and that's important, invited by the women into that, then we might help get their voices heard and get their kind of problems resolved. It can also look like we run a lot of huis. We have a national hui every 2 years, but we also do pop-up huis every few months that are regional based. We try and do one in North Island, South Island, and a Pacific Island every year at least. And that's just to really kind of go, there is power in numbers, and there's other people whose stories will be similar to yours. So if you're feeling really alone and like your battleground, it's only you versus the world, then you get to meet these other people who go, it's not just you, it's us too.
That seems like a huge thing, no matter which kind of group of people you're talking about who don't hold power.
Yeah.
It feels very much like that's a huge part of it, is going, actually, you're not alone. Let's, come together, and together we can at least figure out what's going on.
Yes.
Or, support each other, rally around each other, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I feel like if you're the only one and you haven't yet found your crowd, you do start to feel a little bit insane, because you're like, there's this big problem, and everyone just kind of looks at you and they're like, no, it's not a problem. And you're like, but it is a problem. So it's really great when you meet other people and they're like, yeah, it's not just you. There is a problem.
Yeah. I mean, I found that, when I had undiagnosed yet depression and anxiety, and just feeling like a crap Christian.
Yeah.
Because Jesus is supposed to be enough.
Yeah.
And I was really struggling, and like, I must be the only one, and once I got diagnosed and then started talking about it, from the pulpit and publicly on the podcast and stuff, there were just so many people going, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I thought I was the only one, or...
I was relieved when I got my depression diagnosis, because I genuinely didn't know what was wrong with me. I'm like, what is happening? Why is my world shrinking? Why is there no colour?
Yeah.
And then hearing that there was a name for this thing and there was a stuff you can do about this thing, I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah. I felt very much the same. It was real interesting actually in my discussion with the doctor, because I wanted him to say the word depression, because I didn't want to name that for myself. But he wouldn't do it. He wanted me to do it.
Oh, no.
So he's like, so what do you think it is?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, I don't know. It feels like depression, maybe. He's like, I think that's quite perceptive, And it was like, okay, I've got to own this. But
yeah.
But yeah, getting back to the women thing, that's such an important thing. I've long been a supporter of not only the fact that we need, quote, to let women do stuff, which is the typical way it's phrased.
Yes, such a low bar.
Yeah, but actually the church is poorer if women aren't being free to be who they are in this space.
Yeah, and I feel it also means we lack biblical integrity when we don't allow women into the space, because you look at Christ and who followed him, like who was the first person that he revealed himself to? Oh, look, it was a woman. Who was out there, one of the disciples working with him? Oh, look, women. And then even in the early church, you hear stories of these women who are doing fantastic ministry from their homes. Yeah. And then somewhere along the way, we got this different narrative that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
And you're going, that doesn't really biblically align.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the turning point for me simply came from, leaving home in a church that hadn't had women preaching, and being very strong in knowing why that was right.
Yep.
And then started going out with a girl, went to the church that she was at, and there was a woman preacher, and it was the best sermon I'd ever heard in my life. and went, well, this is stupid if God doesn't want me to hear this. Like, what's up with that? And that began a process. And then, I got to the stage of going, actually, this is wrong. That this is hurting people. This is harming people.
Yeah.
And so, it's something that I've long been a champion of in the ways that I can.
Yeah.
And But yeah, to hear that there's that kind of work being done, I think is really encouraging. It would be nice if that work didn't have to be done.
For sure.
But we'll get there, you know.
Yeah.
We're working towards that, and I think there's a lot of attitudes that need to die off in order to make it more the case. But
I got very grumpy last year, and I got very grumpy around the same time I was asked to be a speaker at a hui. And in my grumpiness, I did this big spiel on why the church was dying, and it was a really good thing. And then I had to explain slightly that I did want it to be resurrected, but just with a whole lot of stuff that isn't serving us, doesn't actually seem to be that Christ-like. Maybe that stuff needs to stay dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really like that metaphor, actually.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
And then because I really love kind of feminine theology and embodied theology, then the question is, if you are resurrecting and it's kind of like a rebirth, then how can we as church now act as those kind of like midwives for the future ahead? What can we birth and help other people to birth in this space?
Oh, that's beautiful. I like that. And doing that work got you involved in like a UN project? What?
Oh, yeah,
Tell us about that.
Technically, yes. But it was the year that COVID hit.
Yeah.
So
I was trying to figure that out when I looked at the dates and things.
Yeah.
I was like,
So
surely you weren't going somewhere to do this.
Oh, it was so sad. I was all set to go to New York to go to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which they hold every year. And then I think about 3 days before I was set to fly out, two things happened. One is we as a country went into lockdown, but also New York kind of crumbled for a bit there. So I didn't go. I attended on Zoom, which was not the same.
No.
I did get to hear some really cool stuff, but I really missed the ability to meet and network with these incredible women. So yes, technically I did, but also no, not really.
Oh, gutted.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's going to be one of those things that we kind of are all going to look back on our lives and go, hey, remember when the world broke?
Yeah.
You know,
it's a weird one, eh?
Yeah. And yet, you know, kind of life's back to normal.
Yes.
Which some of it you kind of wish it wasn't, you know.
I loved it when everyone was like walking and baking and spending time with each other at home. I wish we could kind of keep a portion of that without all of the death and anxiety and uncertainty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the awareness of just how like the environment is better off when we all slow down.
Yep.
And all that kind of stuff as well. Another thing that you're passionate about in the space of minority groups and things like that is, you know, you're a supporter and you're affirming of the LGBTQAI plus community.
Yep.
Again, has that always been the case for you, or is that like a faith journey? Like what was that like for you?
I loved earlier when you talked about the process of you kind of leave one place with a particular theology, and then it's not like overnight everything changes. There's this kind of unfolding. So I first encountered homosexuality as a concept when I was in the Middle East. I don't know why it was there. Like, it wasn't, my parents aren't anti-gay. They're very supportive. Lots of their friends subsequently have been gay or lesbian couples. So, yeah, it just seemed to be that time. And we had just shifted from having quite a liberal chaplain at the naval base where we worshipped in Bahrain, but the new one who came in was a 7-day creationist. So when I heard about this thing, I went and asked him about it, and so I got a very conservative response. And unfortunately, that was also backed up by the world I was living in Bahrain. It was completely illegal. I can't remember if you could be executed for it, but it definitely wasn't a great time. Yeah. So the perception then was this is wrong. But I had this really wonderful geography teacher who I'll always be grateful to, who was like, but what if it's not wrong? And he just kind of like planted that seed. And so then when I was about 17, 18, and I'd now moved to the UK, which was a lot more affirming and accepting, and I began to encounter these people who had, you know, sexual feelings for people of the same sex. And they were so normal. They were like just like me. I was like, what is the big deal? Yeah. So then I began to do a lot more exploring, and then concluded pretty quickly that actually maybe it was fine. Not just fine, but, you know, more than fine. Yeah. So then I began to be more of a vocal advocate, because having gone through the process, I was like, well, other people could go through this process too, and then we might solve a lot of problems.
I think that's the bit that I'm encouraged about when I've talked to you about this sort of thing, is that you're not comfortable to just go, well, I've changed my mind, I'm okay with it, full stop. You know, you're like, actually, there's actually work to do. I don't have to be the one that does it all, but actually, you know, by at least sharing my thoughts about it in conversation,
it just seems
seeds
like
stuff.
Yeah, it just has always felt like a bit of a disservice to like people around me if I don't tell them there's other options. So, you know, I've had some great friends over the years who are deeply conservative fundamentalists, and just kind of sitting down and being like, hey, you know, I respect the way you think, but there might be something here that you're missing. Like, could you explore that? That seems to be way better than just cutting off people and going, I used to think like you, but now I don't, so I'm going to have nothing to do with you. Yeah. It's not their fault that they're only just starting their journey. Yeah. And if you look at the way that we treat children, we don't cut them off because they can't yet run. If they take a baby step, we're so excited and so supportive. I don't quite know why we don't do that for intellectual journeys. Yeah. Particularly because not everyone has access to education the way that we do here. I'm really lucky that I have been given the ability to go to university and to do some theology scholarship stuff and to do postgrad stuff, but not everyone has that luxury, not everyone has that gift. So why should I judge them by a standard of blessings I've received when they haven't, and then find them some way at fault?
And that's something I've learnt myself as an ally for that community, that, you know, for some of my friends who are part of the rainbow community, they do need to cut some people off because it's about their safety and their identity and stuff. But for those of us who aren't, cutting people off just stops the relationship and stops any chance of you know, working with that person as they journey and stuff. Or and so I think I've seen that now as part of my role as an ally is to actually not leave the spaces where it's an awkward conversation.
Yes.
But to stay in those spaces and be prepared to have the awkward conversation.
I think it can be a really good skill to learn, to be able to sit in uncomfortability in the awkward silence of life. And I think definitely if it is unsafe to remain friends with someone or to keep that relationship, like, don't second guess yourself. But if it's not unsafe, it's just uncomfortable and awkward, try and stick it out, because there might be something really beneficial here for both people to kind of learn and grow and develop. Yeah. And hopefully work towards a bit more kind of heaven on earth type vibe.
You're a chaplain now?
Yes.
What is a chaplain? And what were you doing beforehand, and how did you get into this chaplaincy work?
So I was working as a youth worker before I became a chaplain, but even as a youth worker, I kind of knew I wanted to end up as a chaplain. It's a very good question what a chaplain is, and all of the kind of academic definitions are a bit dull. So the way I like to describe it is, if you had something wrong with you physically, you might go see a physio. So if you have a spiritual problem, maybe go see a chaplain. We are there to walk alongside people, to kind of to hold their hope for them if they can no longer hold it for themselves, just to kind of be that companion during the tough times, a non-judgmental space to listen, and to really hear that person where they're at.
I love that word companion, because that sets it apart from therapy.
Oh yeah,
where the therapist is trying not to be a friend or they're making sure there's that professional distance, which is necessary. But I like that idea of companion means like getting alongside and walking with. Is that what it feels like?
Very much so, and it's such a wonderful job. I really think I've lucked out and got the best job in the world.
So how did the pivot come when you were like, I know I want to do this, but now I'm actually...
So it kind of all came together in what usually is God's timing, but I had finished my BThol and had just finished my postgraduate diploma in chaplaincy and was kind of figuring out if I did a master's or not. And I happened to go to a training on how to respond to suicide as a community. And there I met a chaplain, a mental health chaplain. And it was one of those weird meetings where we talked for maybe like 2 minutes over morning tea. But he remembered me, and then when a space came up, I got this like message out of the blue saying, "Are you the redhead who was at the suicide training like 2 years ago?" And I was like, "Yes." And they were like, "Do you want to come be a mental health chaplain?" And I was like, "Are you sure you've got the right person? You sure
there wasn't like another redhead, because I'm like pretty young and new to this, and I'm like, no, definitely, we're really not new. So I was also, I think, 3 months pregnant at the time.
Wow.
So I was starting a new job,
Yep.
while kind of knowing I was only going to really be there for a few months before taking some extended leave. But it worked out really well. It was kind of a good trainer wheel 6 months, where I could get a feel for the role, because it is a huge adjustment. I think anyone who's worked in the mental health space knows you're suddenly really, what's the word? It's so in your face. There's no escaping it. There's no kind of like looking the other way. I always think of that bit from Hagar, where she says, look not upon the death of the child. And there is that kind of like, someone has to keep witnessing. Someone has to keep companioning. Someone has to keep walking.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore this.
Yeah, and it's a space that comes with it. Like if you were a chaplain in the army or a chaplain,
Yeah.
At university or things like that, they come with their own challenges.
For sure.
But this is like high level challenge, in terms of the type of people that you're walking alongside.
Yeah, I mean, I personally am very grateful I've ended up in mental health chaplaincy, because I find body fluids a bit icky, so I could not be a public health chaplain. I'm like, oh no, I'm so impressed by those people who can just, keep really compassionate face and not see the gross thing. So this is a great space for me, but I don't share my work stories. My mum was like, don't tell me what your day looks like. And I was like, that's fine.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had a diagnosis of depression, and I mean, I find that a lot of people that end up working in that mental health space have their own story. Is that something you were happy to share a little bit about?
Sure, absolutely. So where to begin? So after kind of everything that I had seen and kind of felt when living in the Middle East, and that kind of space of got invaded by various different groups, and there was martial law for a very long time. People with AK-47s would come on and check my school bus, and people would just kind of like disappear. So that was kind of happening. And after I left, I then got a diagnosis of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, because I was kind of very much operating with that level of awareness as if something is about to happen. People are about to come through the door of my classroom, that type of thing. So I kind of had already had a little bit of an engagement with a mental health challenge, but that hadn't been too impactful, in that I got some really good counselling and some support at the time. But then I'd had a relationship that didn't go great. It was quite abusive. And so when I left that relationship, I became incredibly depressed and I had a lot of suicidal ideation and a lot of anxiety. And at first I was kind of like not happy with that, but I didn't really have any motivation to do anything about it. I didn't really feel like there was anything wrong enough to make it worthwhile fixing. But then I went and I saw an old family friend who is a chaplain in a school, and she was like, I would like you to do what I do. And I was like, I want to do what she does, but if I'm going to be a school chaplain, I'm going to have to role model like way better life choices and go get some help. So I went and got some counselling and went on antidepressants for a while and learnt some much better coping mechanisms and became a very well-healed, whole individual. I always think the healing journey is lifelong, but luckily mine at the moment is in maintenance mode, so pretty easy. But it took a long time. It took about 5 years to fully come right. But I think ultimately it's been a really good experience, because now when I work with people and they say to me, and they're so sure, they're like, I'm never going to feel good again. I can be like, well, I thought that, and here I am feeling good again. Yeah. So maybe you'll have a similar story.
Yeah. I've had that same sort of discussion with people who've been a patient in Hillmorton, who you just are looking for any angle of hope that you can find for them. Yeah. Because you know that hope is really powerful, and that hope is what they're missing a lot of the time.
Absolutely. That's why one of the kind of secondary names for a chaplain is a hope holder or hope broker, because unfortunately for a lot of people, when they're suffering from depression or a lot of mental health challenges, that's often when they feel God the least. And they lose their sense of hope, they lose their sense of purpose and meaning in their life. And they just need someone else to hold it for them for a little while until they can take it back for themselves, and to kind of be that person walking alongside who's like, hey, here's your hope, just a reminder, it's here. I've got it for you. Yeah.
I like that kind of speaks to that very non-Western way of looking at the world, that actually we need each other.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
That we do life in relationships, and whatever relationship we're in, if we're looking at how we can use that relationship's the wrong way of saying it, how that relationship can demonstrate, beauty and joy and hope and things. And it might be that you have to contribute more of that because the other person's not in a space that they can. But at other times, you might be the one that needs it to come from the other person, you know. But yeah, to be in a role where that's kind of your job is a pretty special thing.
It's really cool.
So what does an average day look like? What do you actually physically do?
It's so variable. I have a colleague who said it's really similar to working in ED. You just don't know what's going to happen at any time. So it sounds a bit lame actually, but I'll go into work, I'll have a cup of tea, and then I might go and I'll do a puzzle in a space and just be accessible, or I might go to a coffee morning and just kind of meet some people. But inevitably I'll at some point enter into a conversation. And through the process of conversation and relationship building, the person will start to reveal what's going on for them, what are they finding hard to hold, what are their kind of fears, doubts. And part of being a chaplain is there's quite a lot of stuff that really comes under a spiritual umbrella. As a kind of Western society, we might have moved it out of that spiritual umbrella, but it's kind of those things like, how do you process guilt? How do you do self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others? How do you restore your own hope? How do you work through the feeling that your life is meaningless? Because all of that, from a Christian perspective, can be resolved through a relationship through God, which is great when you have one, and great when that relationship is healthy. But that's kind of two assumptions we really cannot make for the majority. If you're non-Christian, these things still apply and you still need to work through them. You just might have a different framework that you use to become spiritually healthy. So as a chaplain, I don't pick sides. I'm not there to evangelize. In fact, I think I get fired if I evangelize, which suits me great because I've always been slightly awkward at that. But really, I'm there to go, okay, you keep telling me about this thing that you did 25 years ago. How long is that going to have power over you? How can we work through this? Maybe find some self-forgiveness, maybe do a ritual of letting go or kind of cleansing, that type of stuff. So a lot of relationship building. And then I also run a couple of groups on, one is what spiritual health can look like. It's quite generic, secular. And then another which is a communion service. I think I do 2 of those in a week usually on different wards. And then usually in my afternoons, that will be when I go and see kind of our longer term people who I already have existing relationships with, who I'll kind of check in, see how they're doing, if there's anything I can do for them. And then a wee bit of resource making.
Nice.
Yeah.
I really like that the evangelizing is taken out of the picture.
Oh, it's so good.
Because, my parents didn't teach me this, but just the environment that I was in kind of taught me that the only reason you build relationships is so that you can convert people.
Yeah, healthy.
Yeah, and you've always got this kind of this underlying agenda.
Yeah.
And when you go into this sort of service role that you're doing, people can smell an agenda a mile away.
Oh, for sure.
And I think the work you do can be so much richer because it's just not part of the deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. What's the most challenging kind of part of your role?
I think there's 2 that I've really had to take to kind of spiritual direction and supervision. The first is when you meet people that we kind of class as pastoring until death or terminally ill with a mental health challenge. Because as much as we like to give hope that healing will happen in this lifetime and in this context, that's not the way for everybody. There are some people who you meet who have the equivalent of terminal cancer, and you're just kind of sitting with them waiting for the day when they pass away. And so really you're there to provide as much joy and hope as you can in the meantime, and also to be a support to their whānau and to the staff as well who have ongoing relationships with this person. And that initially was really challenging for me because, you know, as a Christian, you kind of really want God to wave his magic wand and fix this. And then you have to kind of do a lot of work on, well, what is my theology of fixing? Yeah. Why is it so particular? Why do I assume my understanding of fixing is the correct one and the way that God should do it? So there's a lot of humility to be learned and a lot of self-care that needs doing when you're working with someone like that.
Yeah.
And then the second is sometimes you encounter someone who isn't terminally ill with mental illness, but they really don't want to be helped either. They just really want to kind of sit in their mental health challenge. And as a person who really kind of likes to bring that hope, when you encounter someone, you kind of get a bit lost. You're like, okay, I really just have to sit alongside you as you are, and you're kind of desperate to give your little hope gift, however that looks like, but you can't, it's not appropriate. So it can also be quite hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. But great that, I mean, you talked about having professional support for that.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it without that, could you?
No, and a lot of times it's just about removing yourself, because the person might have not ever had that opportunity to just kind of sit in it before. There might have been a parent who just really had to keep going because they had a toddler at home, or it might be someone who's never been heard before. And so actually, although they really want to just kind of sit in that space, it might be really empowering for them to feel heard for the first time and seen just where they're at, no expectations, no agenda on what they need to do next. So it can actually be one of the deepest, most beautiful moments. But when you first go in, you're like, okay, I'm going to have to like do some prep here and make sure I've got lots of fuel for this journey.
Yeah, which is a great insight to have, to know that you need to look after you so you can be there for other people.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to the people I work with, because there's just no judgment, total understanding. If I'm back at the office and I wouldn't normally be in the office at this time, no one is ever like, why aren't you with patients, or why aren't you with clients? They're always like, do you need a coffee off-site? And you're like, yes, I do.
I always go back to that thing of, you know, love your neighbour as yourself. And that if you're not loving yourself, it's really hard to love your neighbour.
Yeah.
You know, that we often, again, in the traditions that I've been part of, sometimes it's love your neighbour to the detriment of yourself.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
It just doesn't work. You know, you can't love people when you're burnt out, or when
no,
you're spiraling.
Can't. No, you can't. But I do love, there is an inversion that I have found helpful that other people might find helpful. And it's in that time where, in lots of mental health journeys, where you really don't like yourself very much. You have very low self-esteem, and you're kind of like, what am I even doing here? Like, what am I good for? And so one of the things we talk about is it can be really hard to just kind of flick on a switch and start loving yourself. So if you're meant to love yourself as your neighbour, can you start loving your neighbour? And then you kind of reflect on what you're doing, and you're like, wow, I've actually done some nice stuff for someone this week. I've actually been quite kind. I've actually done some like service and had some meaningful engagement. And then by loving your neighbour, you start to like yourself a little bit more, and eventually that like can turn into a love for yourself.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. What do you find most rewarding about what you do?
When I never see people again, which sounds really bad, I know, but we have quite a few people who will come in and out for a season. So we'll see them for 1 week, and then they'll be discharged, and then they'll come back the next month, and so on and so forth. But there will be this moment where they are now well enough, they've gone through that kind of hardship, and they're not coming back now. And you're kind of like, yes! And you might be a little bit sad that you're not going to see them again, because usually you've built up a relationship with this person, something that can even look like a friendship. But you're also genuinely stoked because it means they've reached this place of wellness. So
yeah, and that you got to be a part of that journey.
Yeah, that is such a gift. That I don't think it breaks my heart when people in a mental health journey decide to kind of opt out and have a death by suicide. Because they usually, one of the reasons why is they feel like such a burden. They feel like they're offering nothing to anybody else. And I'm like, but if you could see how good you make people feel, how, and being invited into your journey, invited into that space to help someone can be really fulfilling and meaningful. And there's also this kind of weird Western concept that filters in that we're meant to be productive, or there's something we need to do to be valuable. There's no space to simply be valuable because you are valuable. So I just wish people knew that more.
Yeah. In my experience, when we go into these roles to serve others, we often spend a lot of time learning things about ourselves or learning things about the way the world works.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of those learnings for you as you've gone into this role?
I'm a lot better at running groups than I thought I would be.
Yeah?
Yeah, particularly if your work is all sorts of mental health challenges will be in Hillmorton. You can have two people who are like really, really elevated and you're trying to do a group contemplation kind of exercise. Just being able to kind of steward that and facilitate a group that is kind of slowly going into chaos, and you need to time the ending just right before it actually does go into chaos. It's been a really cool skill to kind of learn and develop. I think also reflecting back on my own kind of resilience has been really lovely. I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week where they kind of asked me to reflect on my journey. And there's this kind of weird point, I think, for someone who's gone through their own mental health experience, we're like, wow, I have come through that. I remember hoping for that day, praying for that day, totally convinced that day wouldn't come. And not only have I had that day, but I've now become well enough that I can actually turn around and lend a hand. Like that in itself is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And I have so much respect for my colleagues, a lot of whom have a very similar story. They had a mental health kind of challenge and then now have come back to kind of work in that space. So it's just really been nice and kind of affirming for me that, you know what, I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Very encouraging to look back and see that journey. Because, I mean, like you, I know those times when it's like, this is never going to get better.
Yeah.
I remember when I finally went to the doctor was because we were staying at my parents' house and rooms in our house were getting painted, so we'd moved into my parents' for a couple of weeks. And I remember just coming out in the morning and going, somebody has to fix me.
Yeah.
Like I can't do anything. Like somebody and Mum just went, why don't you go to the doctor? I was like, okay. All right then.
Mum's a great,
Well, the other part of that was, why don't you go to the doctor? You know, maybe some medication would help. The medication I'm on is awesome. And I was like, the what now? And actually, I'm still on it like years later, and we're on the same one.
Nice. Yeah.
So there's a whole lot there. But having worked in the mental health space now for a while, there's more awareness than there used to be.
Yeah.
But there's still work to do. What would you like to see changed about the way that we as a society support those who are struggling in their mental health?
So I had a really interesting conversation with a colleague a couple of weeks ago that both rattled me and confirmed what I was seeing. And this is a person who's worked in the States and in Norway and in like a variety of other contexts, I think Canada. And she said that she was so excited to meet me because in New Zealand we are so bad at doing holistic well-being that these other countries were way better, including spirituality. And that made me really sad, particularly I think because rightly or wrongly in New Zealand we tend to look at the States and be like, we have better spiritual practices than they do. So then to have someone who worked there go, no, we don't do it well in New Zealand, was kind of confirming of my own experience, but also like, no. I don't like to use the word should, but I will. In New Zealand, we have this amazing context where we have this kind of bicultural wisdom that can really speak into health. And health just doesn't need to be only physical. And we have all of these taonga, these gifts coming in that we can use to make ourselves fully well, not just physically well, but fully well. And that requires spiritual health. But we just don't seem to do it. We'll do a karakia, which is great, but that's kind of it. We don't really take it deeper or look at the meaning behind the karakia we're saying. We maybe will acknowledge someone might have a spiritual need, maybe, when they kind of enter, and we'll be like, do you have a support group? And we'll like list like family, bowling club, church.
Yeah.
No one likes to say it too loud though. So that made me really disheartened. And I think I really appreciated, there's a social worker who I've known for a very long time, and she actually came to me and said, I don't think we're doing spirituality great in my work practice. And I was like, tell me more. She said, well, when we work with the youth and we ask them, what are they doing for their spiritual care? And they say, what do you mean? We're like, oh, what hobbies do you do? And that's the question. And that actually isn't really a spiritual question at all. So I think New Zealand really needs to up its game and go, we have the capacity, we have the wisdom to have a phenomenally well-rounded healthcare approach. It's like coming back to what I said about the church and equality between genders. It's like an almost. We could, we don't, but it would be so easy to. So if we could kind of funnel ourselves in that direction, maybe be a lot more open to it, be willing to actually utilize spirituality in all its fullness would be great. And not just, I think at the moment it kind of gets relegated to the sick people. If you're sick, maybe spirituality might help. But even that is such a small conversation. But certainly if you're well, we don't talk about it.
And of course, because it's not high priority, then it's not funded often.
No.
How is your role funded?
So I'm employed by an organisation called the Interchurch Council for Hospital Chaplains, and they are the ones who get funding and pay the chaplains. I think they get funding in a variety of ways. Some of it comes through the Ministry of Health, and then some of it comes through donations, through maybe churches or fundraisers, but also through individual donations as well.
How do people donate to that?
There is a website. So if you go to ichc.org.new Zealand, I think at the very top there's this green button that says donate, and then you can help us to employ more chaplains, and hopefully having more chaplains will mean more spiritual awareness, at least in the healthcare setting.
Yeah, which, I mean, if you're listening and you resonate with this conversation at all, I'd encourage you to consider that, because like we've just talked about, it's not a well-funded part of our health approach.
No.
And, even when, like you say, we get the almost, for me, the Māori Health Authority was a step towards holistic care, because Māori were going to do it in a more holistic way.
Yeah.
And now, of course, the government's dismantling that.
Yeah.
Or looking to, or I haven't quite where we're up to with that, but it's on the chopping block anyway.
Yeah.
And that broke my heart from that point of view, that we have this real opportunity to learn how to do holistic well-being from those who that's just in their DNA.
And I think we can be so unintentionally dismissive, because we go, spirituality, that's a Māori thing. And then what we do by that is we kind of diminish its ability, but we also diminish Māori in that space by going, well, that's a you thing. It doesn't have any value for anybody else. When actually that's, something that everybody would get value from, and we can actually go, Māori do it well. What can we learn from them?
Yeah. Rather than that doesn't fit our Western model of medicine, so therefore it's unimportant.
Correct.
Which is basically how it's seen by a lot of people.
Yeah. It's like a maybe nice add-on that they might remember sometimes. Yeah,
which is such a shame. But, I mean, getting back to you and your work, I think it's just such an important role that, having journeyed with a couple of people who have been in that Hillmorton space, they're really unwell. Life's not going great.
No.
To have a voice of hope in there is just amazing. So, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the hope that you carry on behalf of others.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
No, honestly, it's a privilege for me.
Hello, hello heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
The times when people take what are seen as weaknesses and turn them into their strengths are some of my favourite stories. What a journey Bridie has been on, and continues to be on, as she cares for and loves those who are often overlooked, discarded, and seem too broken. And how beautiful that she can offer that support, because she knows what it is like to be on the other side of that equation. So thank you, Bridie, for who you are and for what you do. Here is a blessing for you. Bridie, while you admit that the mental health journey is an ongoing constant in life, may your mental health continue to flourish as you pour yourself into the lives of others, while also surrounding yourself with good people who love and care for you. May you celebrate your growing resilience and find joy as you look back on a journey that has taken you from death to life. May you never lose your passion for those who don't hold the power, standing up for and journeying with those who are being oppressed, pushed aside or forgotten. And may the work you do in those spaces be work that enlivens you and spurs you on to more good work, despite the seemingly uphill battle that it will sometimes feel like. As you continue in your work at Hillmorton, caring for patients and showing them that they are valuable, may you never forget that you too have value, just because you exist, and that nothing you do or say can take that away. May you also know, especially when it's hard, that you are making a difference, through your actions, your words, or simply your presence. When the work is hard, may you find space to breathe, to head out for a coffee break, for a chat, or whatever else will help to replenish you for the work ahead, and may you know life and love in the midst of it. As you and Tep raise Makairi, may he know the love that you have for him, and may that ground him for the highs and lows of his journey through life. May you be strengthened when parenting feels like it's getting too much, and know peace even in the midst of turmoil, and may you be filled with the joy of loving someone with all you have, and watching them grow. May you continue to celebrate, to laugh, and to enjoy friendships both inside and outside of your role, and may they be your hope holders when you need them. May you know joy and life in those relationships, that you would ever be reminded of the life you almost didn't have, how far you've come, and how much life, love, and hope you bring to the world. Lastly, may you know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. Join me next time when I talk to Sashiko of Kai Connoisseurs, an amazing whānau-based organisation on the east side of Ōtautahi, Christchurch, using food and business to empower people and communities throughout the city. Until then, me enoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Humai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Mura o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangi a mātou I te kino. Amen.